This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter, something that stopped working while no one was looking. For a long time, we were taught to believe that power moves first and reality adjusts after. That if authority is loud enough, markets will follow. That if a decision is made at the top, the system beneath it will comply. That belief is now failing. Not dramatically, not all at once. It's failing the way pressure leaks from a sealed room. Slow, invisible, relentless. What makes this dangerous is not the decision itself. It's the assumption behind it, the assumption that complex systems can be commanded instead of negotiated. If you stay with me, you'll see why this moment feels confusing on the surface, but deeply predictable underneath. And why what looks like motion may actually be inertia, because once you see where control really lives, you can't unsee what's already slipping away. Here's the reframing that most people miss. Control does not live where speeches happen. It lives where capital decides whether to move or stay still. What actually governs this system now is not authority or ideology or urgency. It is patience. Specifically, the patience of money that can afford to wait. Capital does not respond to pressure. It responds to math, return, risk, time. And right now, the system is structured so that delay is safer than action, so that doing nothing is often more rational than doing something bold, so that restraint looks like stability even when decay is already underway. This is why the loudest moves often produce the quietest results. Why declarations feel decisive, but outcomes barely shift. The system hasn't frozen. It has hardened, and once a system reaches that state, force doesn't speed it up. It bounces off. The danger isn't that nothing is happening. It's that something fundamental has already changed. And most people are still reacting as if it hasn't. And that brings us to the shift you were never told to watch for. There was a time when delay meant weakness, when hesitation signaled uncertainty, when waiting was the cost of not knowing what to do. That is no longer true. Quietly, without announcement, delay became policy. Slowness became strategy. Caution became the default setting of the system before action created momentum. Now, momentum creates exposure. Before committing capital early was rewarded. Now, moving too soon is punished. This didn't happen overnight. It happened through normalization, through quarterly expectations, through repeated lessons that risk is remembered longer than opportunity. So the system adapted, not to grow faster, but to lose more slowly. And once that shift locks in, everything changes. Announcements arrive before readiness. Plans appear before permission. Movement is simulated, not executed. This is the most dangerous kind of change. The kind that feels rational at every step. The kind you only notice after the outcomes stop matching the promises. Because when a system learns how to survive without moving, it also learns how to resist being moved. And that resistance is about to surface in a very concrete way. Then comes the moment that looks like a breakthrough, a meeting, a promise, a projection that sounds precise enough to be believable. Production will rise. Capacity will return. Timelines are offered. Numbers are attached. On paper, it looks like motion. In reality, it's a stress test. Because when you slow the picture down, something doesn't line up. The increases are real but small. The timelines are plausible but long. The costs are acknowledged but quietly deferred. What's being described is not a surge, it's a patch. An attempt to extract movement from a system that hasn't agreed to move. An effort to present progress without triggering commitment. This is where the gap becomes visible between what is being said and what the system is willing to absorb. If you're listening closely, you can hear it. Not in the promises, but in the limits wrapped around them. And once those limits are exposed, a harder question follows. If this is the ceiling, what happens when pressure keeps rising anyway? Here is the mechanism underneath all of this. The system separates risk from reward cleanly, deliberately. Those who authorize movement do not absorb the downside. Those who absorb the downside do not control the decision. Capital is protected by distance, by layers, by structure. Money is deployed only when exit is visible, only when loss is containable, only when time works in its favor. And when those conditions aren't met, the system doesn't rebel. It stalls. This is why projects don't fail loudly anymore. They fade, they linger in evaluation. They remain permanently under review. The damage doesn't show up as collapse. It shows up as drag. Costs accumulate where accountability is weakest. Expectations shift downward without announcement. Risk is socialized. Returns are ring-fenced. So when leaders talk about unlocking potential, what they're really negotiating is exposure. Who goes first? Who pays first? Who can't walk away? And the answer to that question explains why the system keeps choosing inertia even when the pressure to move becomes impossible to ignore. Because once the mechanism is visible, so is the next failure. Now the pace quickens. Pressure builds. Deadlines tighten. Expectations rise faster than capacity. The system responds the only way it knows how. By narrowing, by deferring, by optimizing for survival, not delivery. Signals are misread as momentum. Small gains are amplified. Limits are reframed as discipline. But underneath, nothing fundamental has shifted. Costs remain high. Risk remains concentrated. Commitment remains conditional. Every attempt to force acceleration increases friction instead. Every shortcut adds delay later. And then come the quiet alarms. Security concerns, infrastructure gaps, capital hesitations dressed up as prudence. No one says no. They say not yet. That phrase becomes elastic. It stretches. It absorbs pressure. It buys time until time itself becomes the problem. Because systems built to wait can withstand politics. They cannot withstand physics. And when reality finally asserts itself, it doesn't arrive as a warning. It arrives as a constraint. Here's where this stops being abstract. Because while the system waits, you adjust. You absorb higher costs, longer timelines, more uncertainty packaged as stability. You're told this is patience. That restraint is responsible. That slow movement is a sign of control. But what it feels like on your end is different. Projects that never quite start, jobs that remain pending, prices that respond instantly while relief never does. You live inside the lag. The system protects capital by transferring time to you. You wait for supply to return. You wait for cost to normalize. You wait for decisions that have already been delayed upstream, and every delay is invisible enough to be deniable. Nothing breaks. Nothing collapses. It just doesn't arrive. If this feels familiar, it's because you're not imagining it. This is what managed inertia looks like from the inside. Stay with me, because once you see how this spreads, you'll understand why waiting is no longer neutral. This doesn't stay contained, because the moment one system chooses to wait, another is forced to compensate. Flows redirect. Cargo reúne. Risk migrates. What looks like a local decision quietly reshapes a global map. Markets adjust without permission. Supply finds alternate paths. Costs are redistributed across borders that never voted on the change. And the farther this spreads, the harder it becomes to trace cause and effect. Prices move for reasons no one announces. Shortages appear without a single point of failure. Pressure shows up where preparedness is thinnest. This is how systemic stress travels now. Not through collapse, but through substitution. One delay triggering another. One workaround becoming someone else's problem. Coordination erodes. Trust thins. Everyone optimizes for their own exit. At this stage, control is no longer centralized. It's fragmented. And fragmentation creates volatility that no one fully owns. The danger is no longer miscalculation. It's drift. And once drift becomes global, the future stops being linear. From here, the system has three possible paths. The first is adjustment. Slow, technical, quiet. Costs are acknowledged. Expectations are lowered. Returns shrink, but stability holds. Nothing is fixed quickly, but nothing snaps. The second path is erosion, more likely. Less visible. Delay becomes permanent. Capacity never fully returns. Workarounds replace solutions. The system functions, but only at the margins. Every year feels slightly worse than the last, without a single moment to blame. And then there is rupture, not collapse, not chaos. A break caused by accumulation, a point where physics overrides finance, where infrastructure fails faster than patience, where a shock arrives and there is no slack left to absorb it. These paths are not choices made in public. They emerge from incentives. From what gets funded, from what gets deferred, from who is allowed to wait and who is not. Right now, all three are still open. That's what makes this moment deceptive. Because the future hasn't locked in yet. But the clock is no longer neutral. And the final question isn't which path we want. It's which one the system is already pricing in. This is the part people expect to end with reassurance. It won't. Because systems like this don't announce when they've crossed a line. They keep functioning. They keep trading. They keep producing just enough to look intact until suddenly they don't. What you're watching now is not a crisis. It's a calibration, a test of how much delay can be absorbed before consequence becomes unavoidable. And the most dangerous assumption still in play is that someone is in control, that there is a lever left to pull. That timing can be negotiated later. But systems that learn how to wait also learn how to ignore urgency. They outlast administrations. They outlast narratives. They only respond to constraints they can't reroute. If you're looking for certainty, you won't find it here. What you can find is awareness, because the next moment, the one that clarifies which path we're on, won't arrive with headlines. It will arrive quietly, embedded in prices, in availability, in what stops showing up when it's supposed to. This doesn't end here. It continues in what we choose to examine next. If you want to understand where this system bends or breaks, keep watching.